There are many people throughout Times Square, and one thing all people have is eyes. Now, creating realistic eyes requires quite a few little techniques. Now, I'm going to cover a lot of things that I've covered in other movies, but here they're going to come together to form a realistic-looking eye. I'm going to get a tone to be just my basic skin tone. I'm picking a color right here, which I'm going to just fill the background with that color. Now, right here, I'm going to start to form the eye. Using the pen tool, I'm going to create an eye. So I'm going to go in here and create this one path, which is basically going to be the white of the eye. So it's going to create this little shape like this, and then close it off right here, like so. So there's the white of the eye. Using my elliptical tool here, set the paths. I'm going to create a big oval right here, which will become the iris of the eye, and then a smaller one inside, which becomes the pupil of the eye. Now let's take that one and just put it in position so it's centered right there like that. So there's the three paths that are going to make up the basic eye. So I go over here and save them. I want to make sure I have them. There's the paths. So now I'm going to select the one path that's going to be for the white of the eye, and I'm going to create a layer on top of this, which I'll call white. And I'm going to pick a color that's going to be good for the white of the eye, which is not exactly a pure white, but slightly off-white, like a gray. Click OK, and then I'll fill that path in that layer with that color. Then I'm going to pick the circle right here, which is going to be the iris of the eye, and I'll create a layer for that, the iris. And I'll pick a color for the iris to be, so let's say we're going to say a blue eye. So I'll pick a nice deep blue like this, click OK, and fill that path in that layer. Then I'll pick the central path, which is for the pupil. Go into my layers, create a new layer, call it pupil. Return my colors to black and white and fill that path with the black. So there's the three basic shapes which are going to be the eye. So what I need to do right off the bat is to go in here and clip these two so they become parts of a clipping group with the white. Click here and click there. I held down my Option key, hold on the PC so that I was able to do that. And there are still individual layers, so as you can see, I can then move them around so that the eye can be looking around, doing whatever it wants to do, and whatever. So there it is. There's my eye. So now, I'm going to start to make this look dimensional and make it look real. I'm going to take the pupil. I'm going to go in there and give it a little outer glow, which I'm going to change the color to, say, something in the blues, nice kind of a light blue like that, and increase the size just a little, and bring down the opacity. Just a little hint of a glow there, just like that. And I'm going to blur it a little bit. So I give it a little Gaussian blur, which I'll just blur it just a little. Let's say, yeah, that looks good. Click OK. The iris, I'm going to go in there and give it a couple of things. I'm going to give it an outer glow, but this outer glow is going to be a little darker. So I'm going to go in there and go with a kind of a gray, about like that, a little darker than the other one is, and put this to multiply so that gray will show up. Maybe I'll put it in normal so it'll show up even more, and put it out there. So it's just this little hint, and spread it out so we have this little hint of a gray along the edge. Then I'm going to give it an inner glow, and the inner glow is going to be a deeper blue. So I'll go with a nice deep blue like this, even darker, and set that to multiply so I can see that dark tone and increase that size a bit like that. And we'll click OK. I'm going to go ahead and blur this, the same blur that I gave to the pupil, and there we see that. Now we need that muscle structure in here, all those little textures that we see inside the iris. So I'm going to create a layer in between the iris and the pupil right there, which will automatically be clipped with the others in the clipping group. And in that layer, I'm going to create a nice big square just like that, kind of center it inside the iris there. And I'm going to fill that with, it doesn't matter what color because I'm going to totally change it afterwards, but it needs a color. So I'm going to put a black in there, and I'm going to give it noise, add noise. And it's going to be a lot of noise, just like that. Then I'm going to apply a filter to that noise layer, a radial blur, which has that spin mode, I'm going to say zoom mode at 100%. And by the way, you can set where that center of the spin and so on is going to be, but I'm going to want it dead center. Click OK, and I get that kind of a spread, which I'm now going to go in there and increase the contrast by playing with levels and bringing all the tones into the visible area so we can see that we're getting these nice little streaks like that. Click OK. I'm going to set that layer to multiply mode, so it simply applies those dark tones over the blue, bring down the opacity just a tad. Now I could deselect it, and I only want to see it inside the iris. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the iris layer into a selection by Command-Control clicking on it. And now that it's selected, I'm in that layer of the texture. In fact, let's call it texture. And I say give it a mask. Since the area is selected, it's going to confine the mask to that area. We see that we now have the texture inside the iris. So now we're going to go in there and start adding more dimension by going into the white and taking my burn tool. I'm going to set this to highlights, and I'm going to go in here and just very lightly start to go in there and just kind of paint in some dark tones along these edges in here. I'm going to go to the iris and kind of darken the top part of the iris. Maybe darken a couple of little areas here and there. I'm going to set this over to shadows, so I'm going to get deeper blues as well. So I'll get some nice deep blues in there like that. And maybe I'll highlight a few areas. So with the dodge tool, I'm just going to lighten a few right in there. Just lighten up that little area. Just add a couple little highlights to the iris, just like that. So now on top of this whole thing, I'm going to add one more layer, which I'm going to clip with the bunch, and we're going to call it the little sheen or reflection or whatever you want to call it. We'll switch to white, and right in here I'm going to just draw in a couple of tones, and we'll just go and create a couple of little dots and little patterns and little shapes and stuff like that. That'll become the little reflections. Now I'll go in there and blur that. So we'll just blur those just to soften them up a little bit. Give them a little softening right there like that. And we'll set that to screen mode and bring down the opacity just a little. It just becomes a little hint of some lights in there. Now, we need one more thing. So on top of the white, we're going to create another layer which automatically gets clipped. And we'll call this one pink. This will be the pink areas of the eye. So I'm going to pick a nice pink color. Let's say we pick pink like that. And I'm going to get a soft edge brush. And I'm going to go in here and make the brush larger. And I'm just going to paint in some little pink areas right in here like this. Now that pink's a little strong, so we might want to adjust it later. But I'll just paint a little pink along this edge here, just like that. And if it is a little too strong, we can easily fix that. We'll go into hue saturation and bring down that saturation a little bit so it's not so strong. And maybe darken it just a tad. There. So now to that, I'm going to take my burn tool and make the tip much smaller, and I'm just going to add a little darkening right along this edge here. And let me set this to highlight, so instead of intensifying the color, I'm going to get some blacks going on in there, and I'm going to just kind of darken certain areas just like this to just start to give that a little dimension. Now, if you're not sure of how this looks, look at your eye in a mirror or ask somebody to come over and pose for you, and you just go in there and just add a couple little tones to darken that little edge and maybe even give it a little highlight. So I'm going to just make this brush very small on the dodge tool and just add a little highlight right in there so we get this little sense of moisture. Then once again to the white, I'm going to just add a little more darkness with a nice big brush right into this area here just to darken that and make it a little more rounded towards the edges like so. And there you see that we have the basic shape of an eye, which we can take further in one of the other tutorials where we'll start to add a little more dimension to the actual surroundings of the eye and add eyelashes and eyebrows and the whole rest of the face.